Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another year of Taste of Seminary, or the subtitle is I've forgotten the subtitle. Something about Christian perspectives on faith and culture.
And contemporary issues.
So there is a long subtitle, but we have the privilege tonight to hear from our very own Dr. Emily Wenneborg. She is the director of the Pascal Study Center since 2022. She did her PhD right here at the University of Illinois in philosophy of education and religious studies. Some of her more recent publications can be found on the Hedgehog Review, Ad Fontes, I hope I pronounced that right, and the Front Porch Republic. And just for what it's worth, a little advertising for Emily. Every Monday this semester, during the lunch hour, the Pascal Study Center is hosting how do I describe that? It's a communal reading of Scripture. So Scripture is read aloud, and then there's time to reflect on it silently after we've had pizza. So, certain things. And there is...
the lead time.
Yes, all right. There is a third and final dinner discussion that will be hosted on Saturday, November 15th at 6 p.m. The topic this semester has been work. And in this last and final installment, the discussion will be surrounding the challenging dynamics of working from home. So tonight, we will not be bored as we hear about boredom. So welcome, Dr. Wenneborg, and let's give her a round of applause. Thank
you. Thank you, Todd, and thank you everyone for being here. I can't tell you how much of a difference it makes to look out at a room that is almost 100% friends. And that sounds really bad. I mean by that there are a couple of you that I don't know very well, and I know the rest of you quite well. And that just sets my mind and my heart at ease to know that I'm not talking to strangers, I'm talking to people that I know. And as I've been preparing for this, hoping to give you some amount of wisdom for navigating the world that we live in today. As Dr. Daly mentioned, actually Dr. Daly did not mention, so I'm glad that I'm going to mention it. I have two roles with Urbana Seminary. I am the director of our campus outreach, Pascal Study Center, which is what those events that Dr. Daly was mentioning are part of. And I'm also an assistant professor of, I hope you write this down, it will be on the quiz, philosophy of education and religious studies, which goes by the very memorable acronym of PAIRS. I have another title, though. Other way. I am mama to this cutie pie, Forrest, my just turned 2-year-old. There he is with green icing from his birthday cupcake smeared all over his face. And here he is on the first day of school this year. Now, as you can imagine, when I became a mom, a lot of things changed in my life, not least of which was my relationship with my smartphone. I became more aware of how often I'm on my phone because I felt uncomfortable bringing my phone out around my new baby. I had heard kind of rumors of research around children and screen time. I wasn't quite sure what screen time was, but apparently it's bad for kids, maybe the rest of us too. Now, with other people, like my wonderful husband over here, I kind of felt like I didn't think about bringing my phone out around them because I kind of felt like they were at saturation for phones already. But my baby, especially my brand new baby, felt in some ways screen-free. Like he hadn't been around screens, and so every time I pulled out my phone, I felt like I was exposing him to this device. I'd heard about something called secondhand screen addiction, a little bit like secondhand smoke, that kids can actually have negative effects from the adults in their lives being on their phones too much, not just from giving the phone to their kids. So I had this new worry, which led to a new awareness of being on my phone. At the same time, I found that I was turning to my phone more than I ever had before. Sometimes this was to distract me from something that was unpleasant, the pain of early breastfeeding, and sometimes this was to cope with the boredom of caring for a very young child. And realizing how much I was on my phone kind of made me more aware of something I was already a little bit aware of, something that I like to call the chips and dip loop. There's a reason we call this Taste of Seminary. So let me explain. Imagine that it is the big game. There we are for the U of I bowl game last year. And most of us in our orange. I had to sneak in with a little bit of blue. Imagine that it's a big game and you're ready either at the tailgate or in front of a big TV and you have a big spread of chips and dip. And in explaining to me how to do a bowl game, my friend Mary Sievers explained to me the chips and dip loop. The idea is you get your plate full of chips and dip, and you go and you sit down, you watch some of the game, you eat your chips and dip, and at some point, you have run out of either chips or dip. So what do you have to do? You go back to the spread, and you refill your plate with whichever one you've run out, and maybe a little bit of the other one too, because you kind of have to balance that out. Then you go back and you watch some more, and at some point you've run out of either chips or dip. And so what do? You go back to the spread and you refill your plate. This is the chips and dip loop. It's like the literal version of the chips and dip loop. But I found this to be a good metaphor for my relationship with my phone as well, that I will find myself bored, and so I will look for something to do on my phone, maybe a subreddit to follow, maybe a Instagram account to follow, maybe a profile on Twitter to follow. If you have no idea of any of the things I just mentioned, congratulations, you don't need to hear the rest of this talk. So I've got something to help me with my boredom, to distract me from my boredom and give me something to do. But then, once I've decided that I'm interested in this, maybe it's a game that I want to play, I find that I feel like I need to keep up with it. And I worry about kind of getting behind on it or losing the updates of what's going on. And so I feel like I need to stay on top of it. But then after a while, I get bored again. And so I look for more things to subscribe to, more things to follow, more games to play, and then I feel like I need to stay on top of them. And so this is the chips and dip loop. I think that this is driven by two desires that we have innately as human beings. We have a desire to be entertained, and we have a desire to be informed. We have a desire to not be bored, and we have a desire to not fall behind and lose track of what's going on. And so these loop that way, just like your plate of chips and dip at the bowl game. But remember, when I was a new mom, I had this new concern about phone exposure. I was worried about every single time my phone came out of my pocket that I was contaminating my new baby in some way. And this made me realize that my phone really was the only coping mechanism that I had for boredom. The first and last place I knew to turn when things felt the least bit unpleasant. And if you look through my camera roll from Forrest's first 6 to 9 months, the extremely high volume of selfies that I have shows you the uneasy compromise that I came up with so that I could be with my baby and be on my phone at the same time by taking adorable selfies. I want you to know I originally had 2 full slides of these, and I cut it down to just these 3, which I think are the cutest ones. So I became aware that I didn't like pulling out my phone. I became aware how much I was relying on my phone, and I also realized that I didn't like the person that I became, particularly when I was scrolling on social media. And there was a particularly nasty version of the chips and dip loop that would happen. I wonder if any of you can relate to this. I would get a few moments to myself, usually in the bathroom, And I would pull out my phone, because I didn't want to be bored, and I would start scrolling, and I would learn about something that the internet was upset about. Somebody had done or said some atrocious thing, and I would emerge from that 2 minutes of privacy incensed about something that I didn't even know was the case when I entered. When I realized that, I finally deleted almost all of my social media apps, and I have never once regretted that decision. But even with the apps gone, my uneasy relationship with my phone remains. And it's only gotten more complicated as Forrest has grown from a baby to a toddler. He's still a baby there, but this photo reminds me of nothing more than that moment when Gollum has finally gotten the ring and is falling into Mount Doom, into the lava to his doom. But he has the ring! That's what I see when I see that. He's fascinated by anything with a screen. It could be a phone, it can be a tablet, it can be a TV, it can be a watch, it doesn't matter. If it has a screen, it's magnetized to it. When we call grandparents, he's more interested in playing with the tablet than talking to Dee Dee and Grandpa Hugh. He knows that phones take photos and videos, and usually those photos and videos are of him. And he will demand to see baby, which makes it really hard to actually take a video of whatever cute thing he was doing. This happens this afternoon. In this photo, I don't know if this is at all relevant, I just thought it was really funny. This is a crosswalk sign at the school near our house, and he started tapping on it and saying, "Send message to Dee Dee," which is my mom. And during the span of time that I was preparing this talk over the last few weeks, he learned to say cheese and "Hey Siri." That was a little embarrassing. So, okay, I knew about research about screens and kids' brains. I was concerned about exposing my new baby to these devices, and I noticed how strong a pull they had on him and on myself as well. All of this led to quite a bit of worry. Do you think we can shut that door now? They're making some kind of amazing drinks, but it's right on my bad ear side, so it just makes it all echo. It made me wonder, should I be trying to create a screen-free bubble for my kid? Is there something about these devices themselves that somehow changes the way we relate to boredom and distraction? Now, you don't have to be a parent to wonder if we spend too much time on our phones. Here's some recent statistics. 90% of Americans own a smartphone. 90% of American adults own a smartphone. About 4 in 10 American adults say that they're online almost constantly. And both of those numbers get higher for younger people. This has led to, by the way, if I was going for non-reliable sources, I could have had much scarier statistics up here, but these are from Pew Research Center. I want to stick with things that I can be pretty confident about. This has led to a proliferation of books with strongly worded titles like The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World, How to Break Up with Your Smartphone, and 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. This has also led to some books offering, I think, quite sound and worthwhile Christian wisdom for navigating the world that we find ourselves in. Here's 2 that I read recently. Restless Devices, Recovering Personhood, Presence, and Place in the Digital Age, and Digital Liturgies, Rediscovering Christian Wisdom in an Online Age. I think both of these are very helpful books, and I'll draw on both of them at the end of my talk. But for tonight, I want to turn instead for insight to the 17th century French philosopher, apologist, mathematician, and scientist Blaise Pascal. If you didn't know this talk was about Pascal, now you know. Spoilers. So why Pascal? Why bring up a guy that died 400 years before the invention of the smartphone? Well, in The Extinction of Experience, that one, Christine Rosen worries that we are losing the ability to cope with boredom, much like I was discovering as a new mom. She writes, in effect, our devices eliminate boredom, not by teaching us to cope with it, but by outsourcing our attention so that we don't have to cope with it. What she means by that is that the real problem is not our inability to pay attention because of the constant distractions of a smartphone age, but rather our inability to be alone with our own thoughts. And she references a famous quote from Pascal, which you may have heard or even seen passed around online. I got a lovely, if you Google this quote, you can find a dozen of these. Here's the quote. I have often said that the sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room. Rosa continues, why do we feel entitled never to experience boredom? What does it say about our age that we fear idle time so keenly? But she leaves these rhetorical questions unanswered, and she goes on to reflect on the quite well-documented benefits of daydreaming. She ends with a really beautiful thought in this section. She writes, to be fallow is not the same thing as to be useless. It is to let rest so that cultivation can occur in the future. We have a whole other Taste of Seminary talk on that idea. But I want to go back to this rhetorical question. What does it say about our age that we fear idle time so keenly? And I'm particularly interested in the Pascal reference that precedes it. It's a bit of an odd quote to bring up in this context, isn't it? Don't smartphones make it easier for us to stay at home in our own rooms? What does Pascal even mean by this? Pascal never met a touchscreen. Like I said, he lived almost 400 years before the invention of the iPhone. So no matter how relevant this statement sounds, his original meaning had nothing to do with Facebook or Instagram. In fact, some of you know, Pascal played a key role in the history of computing too, actually. He invented the precursor of the bus system. I'm not kidding. That was a slip of the tongue, but a pretty fitting one. Well before smartphones, computers, or even electricity, Pascal invented the first working addition machine. Oops. There we go. This is the Pascaline. I think this is a later reproduction. But this thing uses no electricity, and it adds sums up to, what is that, 6 figures?
Wow.
Yeah. Now, it's possible to invent something and then also worry about its effects. That hopefully goes without saying. Not to mention that this thing couldn't exactly play Candy Crush. Even so, Pascal's invention, as well as his other scientific achievements, demonstrate that he was not a technophobe, right? He didn't fear, he wasn't a Luddite, he didn't fear technology. He helped move it forward. In fact, he's at the cutting edge of the scientific and technological capabilities of his day. There's a whole lot more I could say about that, but you get the basic point. If he had seen the internet, I think he might have been just as likely to celebrate our ability to rapidly spread emergency information and coordinate disaster relief efforts as to lose ourselves in conspiracy theories and cat videos. This might actually be a good reason to reference Pascal in talking about new technologies. Look what Pascal said about boredom, we might think, and he didn't even know about smartphones. What really makes Pascal an odd choice in this context is what he actually says about boredom. So that quote about our inability to stay at home in our own rooms is actually, it kind of, the memes like that make it seem like this one-liner, and Pascal has a lot of brilliant one-liners, but it's actually part of a much longer essay on what Pascal calls diversion. And that essay itself is part of the Pensees, which are Pascal's notes toward a defense of the Christian religion that were found incomplete when he died and published afterwards by his friends. So let's take a look at what Pascal actually says about boredom. We need to start with what Pascal means by diversions. Remember, he can't be talking about Merge 3 games. They didn't exist yet. So what is he talking about? Well, he writes about various forms of advancement, social advancement at court, getting a commission in the army. He writes about going off to war or to sea to face various kinds of dangers. But mostly he writes about what I kind of want to call genteel amusements. So hunting, dancing, and especially gambling. Gambling actually plays an oddly large role in Pascal's thought, especially for somebody who adhered to a very, very strict sect of Catholicism for the latter part of his life. One of his close friends, several of his close friends were avid gamblers, and it's thought that they may have actually been the target audience of the Apology for the Christian Religion that he was working on when he died. At some point in his life, again, his brilliant scientific and mathematical mind, and one of the things that he did was figure out a method for figuring out who would win a game that had to be cut short. So if you're playing a game like this, but you don't have time to finish it, how can you figure out who's winning? And I don't understand this, but I'm told that that method that he came up with became the foundation for modern probability theory. Yes, he invented the precursor to the computer, the precursor to the bus, the precursor to modern probability theory, and I don't think that's all. But that's not tonight's talk. And you've probably heard of Pascal's wager, which is the most famous and the most controversial part of his apologetic strategy. I am not going to get into it tonight. If it is something that you are interested in, keep an eye out for the next time I teach the 1 weekend intensive on Pascal's Pensees. We'll talk about it a lot more in that. So Pascal wants to know why people put up with all this effort and bustle and trouble. He writes about kind of the vanity of all these pursuits. You know, a little bit like somebody today writing about smartphones might say, you did what to get a little party hat for the digital dog that runs along behind your digital character in that game? It's basically what he's saying about this. Pascal concludes that we divert ourselves intentionally in order to distract ourselves. He thinks that if we did not distract ourselves, we would become bored, and our boredom would lead us to think about our true condition, which Pascal believes is utterly miserable. The logic here is a little bit like a sick day. I got COVID about a month ago, and even with the best of medicine, you know you're going to be miserable for a few days, and you really just have to wait it out. And what I usually want to do on a sick day is just like find some mindless show to binge and just like get through the day. And Pascal lived with chronic ill health for most of his adult life. In a reflection on time that I wish we had time to get into, he observes the fact is that the present usually hurts. And from all accounts, that really was his experience of life. It was a little bit like sick day. But Pascal thinks that we're treating that all of our life is really like a sick day. He writes, being unable to cure death, wretchedness, and ignorance, men have decided, in order to be happy, not to think about such things. And what example does Pascal give to prove this point but kings, who were the most privileged people of his day? I kid you not, yesterday on a whim, I decided to look up who was king of France during Pascal's lifetime, during his adult lifetime. It was literally the guy they called the Sun King. If you don't know about this guy, I'm pretty sure if he hadn't existed, the French Revolution wouldn't have happened. Very, very pampered. Very, very opulent. And Pascal points out that kings are surrounded by people whose job it is to offer them diversions. Those might be enjoyable diversions, those might be troubling diversions, but they're always being troubled and bothered and distracted by something. And he actually thinks that that's what makes being a king such a privileged position, is that there's always somebody there to distract you from thinking about yourself. What's really interesting to me about this is that compared with Pascal's day, every single one of us looks like kings.
That's true.
Now, Pascal recognizes that people say they want to be free from all these distractions, but he thinks this is self-deception. This is in that same essay on diversions. He writes, "They do not know that all they want is the hunt and not the capture. They think they genuinely want rest, when all they really want is activity. All our life passes in this way. We seek rest by struggling against certain obstacles, and once they are overcome, rest proves intolerable because of the boredom it produces. We must get away from it and crave excitement." So we think we want to be at rest, but really we seek constant diversion. Does this sound at all familiar? We're back in the chips and dip loop again. Here's another way that Pascal puts it. He writes that we seek rest by way of activity. This always makes me think of this famous T.S. Eliot line, distracted by distraction from distraction. What is it that makes boredom so intolerable? According to Pascal, it's that boredom gives us leisure to think about our true condition. And Pascal believes, as I said, that our true condition is one of unimaginable misery. Here's another longish quote. "Boredom. Man finds nothing so intolerable as to be in a state of complete rest, without passions, without occupation, without diversion, without effort. Then he faces his nullity, that means his nothingness, loneliness, inadequacy, dependence, helplessness, emptiness. And at once there wells up from the depths of his soul boredom, gloom, depression, chagrin, resentment, despair." It's quite the Eeyore-ish view of human condition, isn't it? And we could spend all night unpacking this. But for now, I just want you to note one thing. Our very boredom is itself part of our misery. He is writing about boredom. What is the state of boredom? If we didn't distract ourselves from our boredom, what would happen? We would be bored. It's not just that diversions are evidence for our misery, like binging a sitcom on a sick day. If I stay at home all day and binge a sitcom, you say, "Emily, what's wrong? What are you doing?" "I'm sick. It's a sick day." Pascal does believe that our diversions are evidence for our misery, but there's more than that. He thinks that our misery actually consists in our need to be distracted, as well as in our being so easily distracted. He writes, "Nothing could be more wretched," it's the same thing as misery, it's the same French word, "than to be intolerably depressed as soon as one is reduced to introspection with no means of diversion." In other words, the fact that we cannot be alone with our thoughts, but always need some form of distraction, just is our misery. Pascal sums all of this up in one beautifully written aphorism near the end of that essay. "Without diversion, there is no joy. With diversion, there is no sadness." It's really beautiful, isn't it? Think about this the next time you're tempted to pull out your phone as soon as you have that half second of boredom. But if you are thinking about what we've just been saying, you'll realize that this isn't actually true. This isn't actually what Pascal believes. I think he's being a little bit rhetorical here. Pascal was a master of French rhetoric. I think he's kind of pulling a flourish and a little bit of an expense of philosophical precision. What he actually thinks, though, is that we are miserable either way. They were supposed to do like little animations, but it's fine. With diversions, we're miserable because we have to think about our true condition. Sorry. I knew that was going to happen. Without diversions, we're miserable because we're forced to think about our true condition. With diversions, we're miserable because we've distracted ourselves from our true condition. In one of these states, we don't realize we're miserable because we've distracted ourselves to oblivion, but we are still miserable. In the other state, we're facing our misery head on, and only then do we have a chance to do something about it. In fact, that's exactly why distraction makes our misery so much worse. Well, now they're doing it. You can imagine that I did it that way. This is the fact that we have been distracted from seeking a remedy to our misery is exactly what makes boredom and distraction compound our misery. The only thing, this is Pascal again, the only thing that consoles us for our miseries is diversion, and yet it is the greatest of our miseries. For it is that above all which prevents us thinking about ourselves and leads us imperceptibly to destruction. But for that, we should be bored, and boredom would drive us to seek some more solid means of escape. But diversion passes our time and brings us imperceptibly to our death. If every time we have more diversions, we're further caught in those diversions, we're less able to escape them, it really does start to sound like the cycle of addiction. Or you could think about painkillers that numb us and keep us from actually seeking help. Or turning the car radio up real loud so you don't hear that concerning rattle. Some of you know what I'm talking about. The distractions that we turn to keep us from thinking about our misery are the very thing that keeps us miserable. Now we can see why Pascal spends so much time pointing out the vanity of these diversions. He wants us to turn from them to seek God, who can give us true happiness. This infinite abyss, that's all of these cravings and desires and seeking after different kinds of diversions and amusements, that whole total human package is what Pascal means. This infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself. It's important to keep in mind that Pascal's goal here is not to convince us that God exists, but rather to drive us to seek God instead of wasting our lives on things that won't satisfy us. And this emphasis on combating indifference rather than atheism is the most distinctive contribution of Pascal to Christian apologetics. Again, if you want to get into that more, keep an eye out for the next time I teach a course on Pascal. Pascal wants to turn our spiritual boredom into spiritual hunger. He writes, "We do not grow bored with eating and sleeping every day, for we soon feel hungry or sleepy again." Yeah, it's like he had a baby around him or something. Otherwise, we should grow bored with it. Likewise, if we do not hunger for spiritual things, we find them boring. Okay, that was a lot. Thank you for hanging with me. What does all of this mean for today? Here's my summary, just so we know what we've covered so far, where we've been. Pascal says that we pursue diversion as a way of distracting ourselves from thinking about how miserable and mortal we really are. We say we want to rest, but we actually find rest intolerably boring. And this constant need for distraction is itself part of our misery, because it keeps us from seeking the only source of true happiness, which is God. One of the first things that we should see from this exploration of Pascal is that distracting ourselves is a human phenomenon, not a technological one. It's easy to talk as though screens themselves are somehow the problem. But Pascal shows us that the desire for distraction has a long history. It's not caused by modern technologies, even if it is made worse by them. I'll come back to that in a minute. If distractions have been a problem for so long, then we need to look for an explanation in human nature, not in recent inventions. Not only that, but we need a solution that addresses the heart, not just the technology. We don't need to fear screen exposure any more than we fear exposure to radio waves. Which is a big relief for me, because it means that creating a screen-free bubble for myself or my child is neither necessary nor sustainable. At the same time, I do think that our distractions are worse today than they were in Pascal's day. This is one of the reasons why we want to quote Pascal in this context, as we said before. If what Pascal said was true 400 years ago, how much more so in our day? Smartphones and wearable tech and all of these things. And I've been thinking a lot about why this is so. If it's not the fact that it's digital, right, that it's on a screen, that it's driven by electricity, it's not the technology that's the problem that makes it worse. What is it? And here's what I've come to, the conclusion that I've come to. The way that digital content proliferates puts the chips and dip loop, say that 5 times fast, puts the chips and dip loop on overdrive. Let me explain what I mean. Remember, the chips and dip loop, the metaphorical one, not the literal one, is driven by these two desires. We want to be entertained, we want to stay informed. And one drives us right back to the other in this loop. We seek out new sources of entertainment to keep boredom at bay, and then we feel compelled to stay up to date on the latest content. I think Pascal helps us understand what pushes us into the chips and dip loop, namely our misery. But I don't think he could have imagined the pull of the internet, or what denizens of the internet might call, ooh, shiny. That's for you. You know, you can get caught in the chips and dip loop with offline media too, right? I feel this with books all the time. I need something to read. Let me go look up some lists. Let me go ask friends for some recommendations of good things to read. Oh no, I'm overwhelmed by how many things are on my to-be-read list. Anybody here relate to that? Just me? Okay, good. If it's not books, you might think about in an era of print newspapers trying to keep up with the latest headlines or the latest sports scores. This is not a digital thing, but here's what I think is different about digital media. It's not that it's delivered on a screen, not specifically, but volume, how much of it there is, speed, how quickly more of it is produced, and ubiquity and ambiance. Those are about the most technical words I'm going to give you tonight. Ubiquity means it's everywhere, and ambiance means it's everywhere. Right? I don't think it's the screen, but I do think it's the fact that it's in our pockets. As I was going through some of my research for this talk, I wish I'd started collecting these phrases earlier, because I'd probably have a longer list, but here's a handful of descriptions of the internet. Infinite novelty, pressing urgencies and ceaseless abundance, potentially endless rabbit hole effect. Ready for this one? Infinitely multiplying spaces of the web. And then the smartphone then went and made the rabbit hole portable, inviting us to get lost in it anywhere, at any time, whatever else we might be doing. Information soon penetrated every waking moment of our lives. I only just realized the connection between this infinity and Pascal's thoughts on infinity. Stay tuned for part B of this next year or something. What all of this amounts to is that digital media is effectively infinite, right? There's no end to it. You will never be caught up. Like no other technology before it, the smartphone has come to fill and define even what we could call our micro moments. Right? I've seen lots of nods. You know what I'm talking about. It makes me think a little bit of how it's very similar to when everything went on Zoom. And the meeting starts at 10 a.m. and it ends at 10:59 or 10:50, depending on how you're thinking percent. And like the call ends, and there's no like, "Hey, how you doing? How's your weekend? You ready for this? Oh, you still got some questions? Oh, it's okay. We got this." There's none of that. It's very efficient. It's part of the problem. So volume plus speed plus ubiquity plus ambient leads to what I'm calling, with borrowing from philosopher Charles Taylor, the supernova. Rather than wanting to be both entertained and informed, what we actually find is that we get overstimulated by all this infinity, and that overstimulation leads us to a desire to be numbed. But what do we try to numb ourselves with? But the very same stimuli that overwhelmed us in the first place. Here's a really good example of this. Doom scrolling. Do you know what? I think this half of the room knows what doom scrolling is. Does this half of the room know what doom scrolling is? Right? Okay, good. I didn't teach you guys the way you were. Now you might think doom scrolling, right, where you're sitting there just glued to the horrors of the terrible state of the world, that might seem to contradict Pascal's idea that we're distracting ourselves so that we won't think about our misery, right? I'm going to my smartphone to see misery, to experience misery. How could it possibly be the case that we're distracting ourselves from misery with misery? And spending too much time keeping up with the state of the world can leave us overwhelmed and seeking escape. But if doom scrolling is the extreme of staying informed, then the extreme of being entertained is binging. Now remember, we said that binging can be appropriate during a sick day. But what does it mean if every day is a sick day? So Pascal says, if our conviction were truly happy, we should not need to divert ourselves from thinking about it. And what are we binging? More doom scrolling. If the cure is more of the drug, then we really do start to see black addicts. One final thought on doom scrolling. Remember, Pascal thinks the biggest problem with distracting ourselves from our misery is that it keeps us from seeking a remedy. Doom scrolling lets us experience the reality of fear, violence, and death while keeping it at some distance. Emergency alerts coexist with notifications from our street games, pictures of grandkids and cat memes sit alongside battle maps and verbal statistics. We scroll from out-of-context scripture verse to cancer updates to neglect. And our world becomes as flat as our screens. This flattening serves as a kind of inoculation against remembering the needs of ourselves and those closest to us. Here's Kevin Geary in his book, Why Boredom Matters. We are often more inclined to avoid the pain of boredom than to alleviate the pain of others. All right, we've been doom and gloom for a while. How do we break out of the chips and dip loop? Like it says. The pensives, at least a part of the pensives that I'm drawing on, have more to offer by way of description than prescription. Here's the state of the world. rather than here's what we should do about it. Pascal does try to get to the here's what we should do about it. Frankly, I don't think he does a very good job of it in that text. I think the Pensees as a whole is much more helpful as a diagnostic. Pascal wants to ruffle our complacency, to induce us to seek. Ultimately, he wants to introduce us to the God who stooped to take on not only humanity's humble estate, but also humanity's misery and death. He writes, "It is good to be tired and weary from seeking the true good, so that one can stretch out one's arms to Redeemer." And really, throughout the Pensees, it's not surprising, given his theological location, that Pascal sounds a lot like Augustine. He writes, "You have formed," right, speaking in the Confessions to God as a prayer, "you have formed us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." I think we can find more help from a different writing of Pascal's. His prayer to God for the right use of his sickness. This is a very obscure piece of writing. As I said before, Pascal lived most of his adult life with chronic illness and pain. His sister reports that from the age of about 18, he didn't live a day without pain. If our smartphones lead us to treat every day like a sick day, for Pascal, every day just was a sick day. In fact, Pascal actually did sometimes try to distract himself from pain with diversions. For example, one time he had a toothache and he couldn't sleep, and so he solved the mathematical problem of the cycloid. By the way, I asked Margie, the math professor, if she had any idea what the cycloid was, and she'd never heard of it. That's why I gave you the pretty picture. I hope that's illuminating for you. But Pascal also prayed that the Lord would bring good from his sickness. This is an excerpt from that prayer. "Let me no longer wish for health or life, but to spend it and end it for you, with you, and in you. I pray neither for health nor sickness, life nor death. Rather, I pray that you will dispose of my health, my sickness, my life, and my death, as for your glory, for my salvation, for the usefulness to your church and your saints, among whom I hope to be numbered." What would it look like for us to ask God to use both the great miseries of our lives and the petty boredoms of our lives for his glory and our good? I also think we can get some useful wisdom, again, from some of these recent Christian authors that, unlike Pascal, are actually trying to think about the technologies that we're faced with today. Oh, yeah, there's my first point. Take our misery and boredom to God in prayer. If he can deliver us from sin, I think he can deliver us from the chips and dip too. One of the things that I gathered from these authors is to think about the deeply formative power of repetition. Now, repetition, of course, that's the very thing that we fear when we succumb to the chips and dip loop of boredom, right? Both entertainment and information offer us constant newness. That's the point of them. Yet, in our endless quest for novel sensations, what do we turn to again and again and again and again but our smartphones? Samuel James points out that repetition is part of God's good purpose for our lives. He writes, "It turns out that in God's providential design of our bodies, repetition has an astonishing power to reshape our minds, recalibrate our desires, and even redefine our beliefs. As we immerse ourselves in something time and time again, our thoughts, feelings, and intuitions begin to align with whatever that is." Notice the way James is putting it. This is a relatively neutral feature of the way God has made us. We can immerse ourselves in the online world. We can immerse ourselves in scripture and prayer, and we will be shaped into the image of whatever we turn to repeatedly. James also contrasts the role of repetition versus novelty in growing more Christ-like. He writes, we become more like Jesus as we give ourselves over to practices that push our hearts closer to him in love and trust. As we pursue these Christian habits of virtue in our lives, the Spirit uses them to bring about genuine change in our hearts. If the essence of becoming more like Christ was attaining novel information, these repetitive practices would make little sense. But new information is not the point. It's not merely an issue of knowing the right things, but of having our hearts positioned in the direction of holiness. So we turn to God. We know that he's the one alone who can change us. Pay attention to the deeply formative power of repetition. And lastly, we can seek to abide in the Lord rather than our phones. This point comes from Felicia Wu's song, who uses the biblical image of abiding in Jesus and him in us to point out the way that many of us actually abide in our digital devices. Recall our earlier discussion of micro-moments? This is what song says about that. As persons of faith, how can we become people who pay attention and perceive the presence of God when we are constantly filling every second of our waking hours with content that we read or hear through our devices? And it's one thing for us to not have micro-moments for each other. Very different thing for us to not have micro-moments for God. I never understood the biblical language of abiding as well as I did when Felicia Busong pointed out what it looks like for me to abide in my smartphone. She writes that we abide in our devices not because we're constantly checking them, but rather because we have what she calls a heart of expectancy toward them. She writes, we are waiting and therefore abiding in the digital. And I want to share with you a longer quote from her. It's actually going to take 2 slides, so hang with me. What would it be like if we were to cultivate such a permanent state of expectancy for God's desire to communicate with us? What if my antennae were always outstretched toward checking in with God as much as I'm always checking my smartphone? You guys know about the phantom buzz, right? Where there wasn't actually a notification, or maybe you didn't even feel a buzz, but you're like, let's check. What if we had that attitude toward God? What if we were filled with great expectancy that there would be a word for me? I don't actually know where the slide cuts, so I need to pay attention. And that I could trust that that word would not be a word that simply demanded something from me, but a word that came to nourish me. What if I knew that there was a word that revealed God's very nature waiting just for me? And that his nature was defined by a wild and faithful love that actually likes who I am, enjoys my company, and even takes delight in me. Here are those three points again. Prayer, repetition, and abiding. Our immersion in the digital does distract us from seeking God, but it also can reveal to us what it means to live for him. Just as God can use creational realities from families to farming to football to reveal himself to his children, so I am coming to realize can he use our phones. By noticing how we abide with our phones expectantly and habitually, that just means repeatedly, we can come to understand what it might mean to abide with the Lord and what it would take for us to want to. As Pascal showed us, our problems of boredom and distraction stem from our hearts, not from some unique feature of the latest technology. In my own life, even without a phone in my hand, I can still become bored with my son or my Bible reading. On the other hand, fortunately, it turns out that my toddler is just as enamored with everyday objects as an iPad, at least for now. The reason to step out of the smartphone chips and dip loop when I'm with my son is not to protect him from contamination with screen time, but to enter into the joy of being with him. All the more so with the Lord. One last thought, this time not from Pascal, but from blogger Andrew Sullivan. His widely discussed 2016 article, I Used to Be a Human Being. The whole essay is as good as that title. I really recommend it. Sullivan describes the way that being online came to consume and even define his whole life. He was a very early adopter of a very online lifestyle. And he kept a blog in which he basically kept up with and tried to comment on the entire internet. It's a little bit hard for me to actually follow his descriptions of it because I don't think it would be even conceivable today. But I guess maybe in the early 2010s it was. And in a surprising echo of Pascal, Sullivan wonders, has our enslavement to dopamine, to the instant hits of validation that come with a well-crafted tweet or Snapchat streak, made us happier? I suspect it has simply made us less unhappy, or rather less aware of our unhappiness, and that our phones are merely new and powerful antidepressants of a non-pharmaceutical variety. Yet Sullivan places the origin of the overwhelmingness of busyness and noise not with the invention of the smartphone, nor television, nor the railroad, but actually with the attacks on monasticism of the early Reformation, of the English Reformation and the Enlightenment. The way that the Reformation and the Enlightenment destroyed these spaces of quiet and of calm. This is Sullivan. Now, Sullivan himself finds solace in a form of meditation that seems to be pretty much completely devoid of theological content, as far as I can tell. But he remembers fondly the quiet stillness that churches offered in his youth. I think he grew up Catholic, and he has these very, very poignant memories of just literally entering into a church, whether it was during Mass or just any time of the day, and just feeling like it was a set-apart space because of the quiet. Sullivan believes that churches have abandoned their unique role as spaces of silence, instead thinking they must offer, quote, more distraction to counter the distraction. And then there's a line that stops me in my tracks. He writes, if the churches came to understand that the greatest threat to faith today is not hedonism, but distraction, perhaps they might begin to appeal anew to a frazzled digital generation. Hedonism, of course, being the pursuit of pleasure above all other things. When I read that line, the thought that comes to my mind is Pascal would counter that hedonism and distraction are in fact the same thing. I'll stop there. I thank you again all for coming. And I welcome any questions you might have. They're all very politely giving me a moment to catch my breath.
Do you have any reflections on the book of Ecclesiastes?
Pascal?
Where he's definitely going on to be distracted by everything possibly distracted.
Mm-hmm. None are immediately coming to mind, but I do know that Richard Horner who was the founding director of the Christian Studies Center at the University of Florida, Gainesville, which included the coffee shop Pascal's, from whom we borrowed the name for Pascal Study Center here at the University of Illinois. I know that he's working on a book manuscript looking at Ecclesiastes and Blaise Pascal. The last I heard from him, he was having a hard time finding a publisher for it. I guess there's been a lot of books on that already. But the point being, sorry for the rabbit trail, but point being, there's a very much a connection, David, that you're seeing there. I don't recall if Pascal himself engages with the text of Ecclesiastes, but he's definitely thinking in that vein.
It reminds me a little bit of the Desert Fathers, when I was doing some research on that a few years ago. And one of these overarching themes that another scholar whose name escapes me now, he made this kind of arresting comment that the early fathers, as they went away to escape to their caves, they were brought face to face with the haunting and haunted landscape of their own inner lives. And that was the first step to connecting with God on a deeper level. And I can't help but wonder that, all of these writings that strike us late moderns as fantastic in referring to, demons appearing and these temptations, I can't help but wonder if that wasn't some type of manifestation of spending time, deliberately spending time in these dark spaces. There's not a question.
No, I appreciate that. That was a good connection.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, let's do John and then back here.
Yeah, sure. This is just a comment, but I'm involved with the Mystic Institute at the University of Illinois, and we had a sister Anne Ray. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm involved with the Mystic Institute on campus, and we invited Sister.
And that's the Thomistic Institute after Thomas Aquinas, not the Mystic Institute. I don't even know what that would be.
Thank you.
Yeah, so offering programming very similar to Pascal Study Center, but focusing specifically on the thought of Thomas Aquinas and his heirs.
Yeah. So we invited this one speaker, Sister Anna Ray from the Catholic University of America, and she specifically sort of addressed this, but not really, sort of like an adjacent topic, specifically about musical addiction. And I think there's sort of an overlap. There's an overlapping thing here, and it's just people can't sit still with themselves. And what Sister Anna Ray suggested was sort of just like embracing a more aesthetic lifestyle. So if all you do is listen to music, then just stop listening to music. And so I know that I have this friend of mine who's doing his PhD in he's doing some sort of intersection between computer science and philosophy. And his professor John Schlegler is just take a 15-minute walk without your phone, writing something down every single day. So I really like that it's sort of concrete actions.
Yeah, one of the changes that I've made in my own life because of working on this talk now, when I say this, some of you are going to think this is going to sound like the hardest thing you could ever imagine. And some of you are going to think, why would you ever need to do that? So just prepare yourselves. I have decided that I am not going to listen to music or podcasts or anything else while I'm in the shower. Because for me, that's recovering a rare moment in my life to just hear myself think. And frankly, there's not a whole lot interesting going on anymore, but that's okay too. Is it Michael?
Yeah.
Okay.
Three things. One, thank you for yourself. Two, thank you for this point on the shower. I am personally inspired now.
Yeah, and half of you are going to feel like this is as challenging as running away to a cave in the desert. And the other half of you can't quite figure out how I can safely listen to digital content in the shower without freezing my phone. It's possible, I promise. But I don't recommend it.
Supposed to sing in the shower.
The third and final thing is pragmatic question. I was an undergrad where there was this I was at IU, and there's a chapel open at like all hours of the day, because IU was founded as a seminary, like many schools are. And it was awesome. It was just devoid of distraction. And so we would go there to, I don't know, be ascetic for 30 minutes. And it was centrally located and open, so I'm asking now, does anybody know if such a thing exists here? Are there temples that are open all the time? Because I like the lunch hour idea on Mondays, but that's for an hour on Mondays.
Well, one of the things that Sullivan points out is that a lot of churches today are closed during the week.
Yeah.
They're closed when they don't have programming going on. And a lot of them are only accessible by car. Versus if you think about like Catholic cathedrals in Europe, where you could walk down the street and just go inside and have a space of quiet.
Isn't it St. John's on campus?
Is it open all the time?
Most of the time,
Okay. That's good to know.
It is. Yeah, actually, I'm glad to know that too. What about the
It's a good one.
yeah. That one, exactly.
at Newman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hang out after.
Yeah, St. John, not the divinest one.
Oh, I
The
see.
divine front door.
Good clarification.
Wait,
They're
so
next.
which one's the one that's
It's
actually
the
open?
Catholic,
St. John Dunn.
Okay.
The one that's in our room.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
the bigger one.
Yeah.
With the statue?
Yeah, the one.
The
Okay,
Catholic.
okay, cool.
Let's say St.
Michael, you and I can go check it out sometime together.
Yeah.
I've started to hear about coffee shops that have no Wi-Fi. And that's actually becoming a selling point. Like that people will go to that coffee shop because they want to have a conversation with their friend. And that's a place that they can do that. If anybody hears of one trying to get started around the U of I campus, hook me up with them. I want to talk to them.
Your shower thing made me remember I'm trying to not use my phone when I'm waiting in line or I'm waiting at the doctor's office. And I think what struck me with all of this, and that has struck me, is that that used to be the norm, and that wasn't very long ago.
Yes.
The speed which this has all changed and become addiction and become the norm is just remarkable to me.
Yeah, thinking about these micro moments has been really helpful to me to say, like, throwing this in the toilet is not the solution, right? There are so many good things that we get from our smartphones that I didn't even get into. By the way, I meant to say this in the talk. There are other problems with digital technology besides the ones I talked about today. I wanted to focus on. That's a whole other topic. This is really not supposed to be a talk about smartphones. It's supposed to be a talk about boredom and distraction and the ways that it's exacerbated by smartphones. And I think these micro moments is such a key part of it. You know, it's one thing to say, I can FaceTime my parents anytime I want to, and I can see their faces, and I can see my kid growing up. That's a gift. It's part of God's common grace. I don't want to lose that. But I would like to regain a little bit of headspace. Larry.
So, a while back, I found a YouTube video of a Harvard professor, business professor, talking about boredom. And he said one thing he does is having family time, meaning when they have dinner, there's no cell phones whatsoever. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
We practice that in our home.
Okay.
Yeah, we've gotten into that with you before in our home.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, and it's, you know, so there's another layer that we could go besides this. These are kind of some general, there's actually several layers, we could go deeper than this. And now we're starting to talk about some of the very concrete, what are some practices, some repetitive formative practices that we might take to shift our abiding from our phones to the Lord. Now we could talk about this all day. I didn't really want to, this is fine for the Q&A, but for the talk, it wasn't my focus. Partly because these things can get legalistic so quickly. And it can become about, well, I have better rules around digital technology than you do. Therefore, I'm a better Christian. It's not my goal. My goal is wisdom to train our hearts, to take our misery to the Lord and ask Him to
So I
What
don't
might
know
be
how,
your name?
Ruth,
Thank you.
I don't know if this relates, but at the dinner table, my husband and I, we don't have phones, we usually don't have music, but he works the crossword puzzle while we're eating, and I do the cryptogram out of the newspaper.
Uh-huh.
That's distraction, right?
Well, how do you feel about it?
I like it.
You like it? Yeah. When I was growing up, from almost as far back as I can remember, certainly middle school, until I went off to college, and then every time I came home from college, on Saturday mornings, my dad and I would go out to get breakfast together. I would buy it. So they used to make these things on very thin, long sheets of paper, and they had ink printed on them, and some of those pictures, and they were folded at the time. And my dad would read the sports page, and I would read the comics. That's some of my best memories of being with my dad. One of the things that's different about it is you know exactly what the other person's doing, because you can see it, and you can get out of it very easily. If you're on a phone or a tablet, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know who you're messaging. I don't know if you're scrolling. If you got your earbuds in, I can't tell if you're watching something. And it just is the case that, Mark, hey Mark, I asked you a question. It goes both ways. It's just, there's something about it that does pull in our attention. Something about that shiny. So if you feel loved by that time with your husband, and you have other times in the cycle of your lives where you can have the deep, meaningful conversations that a husband and wife need to figure out how to have together, that doesn't bother me. I don't think it would have bothered Pascal either.
I would add that's shared experience. Even though you're both doing something a little different, it's from the same source, it's at the same time, it's together. It's a shared experience in a way that phones are just not shared experience unless somebody says, hey, let's look at this video together.
Does he ever ask you for help on a crossword?
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, good, yay.
I would feel very different about it, and the way you started to explain it, I wasn't sure where it was going. If you were just sitting there eating,
Yeah.
doing nothing, not listening to anything, not reading anything, and he's over here working across the phone. Yes, dear.
Oh, I see.
Yes, dear. I think shared experience is a really good way to put it. And I would actually say that it's not distraction. That it's actually a focusing of attention on an intentionally chosen project. You know, distraction would be I'm working the crossword puzzle and then my notifications buzz.
You know, we're fighting dementia at our age, so. Mental stimulation.
Yes, absolutely.
How you just define boredom, is that how Pascal would define it? Or would he have seen something like, I don't know, reading a fictional story as a distraction? Even if, you know, for us, it might be concentrated attention, shared experience. Does that help you start?
That's a really, really good question. So Pascal's French word for boredom is ennui, which means that French, especially early modern French that Pascal's writing, doesn't have the distinction of meaning that we would have today between boredom and ennui. Or ennui is kind of that existential, like life has bored me, right? Rather than waiting in the line at the pharmacy has bored me. That said, Pascal, over the course of his life, became increasingly attached to a very austere sect of French Catholicism at that time. I don't know how much fiction there was around at that time, but worldly amusements were not really jiving for Pascal. And I would actually disagree with him. I think he would have been overly ascetic on those things and would have. And I actually wonder sometimes if he had lived past 39, if he would have mellowed a little bit and come to see the way that the joy of the Lord manifests in healthy entertainments.